Welcome to COAB's Advocast, your go-to guide for becoming a stronger voice for adult education. I'm Erin Vobornik, bringing you quick and practical tips to help you advocate with confidence. Let's get started. Welcome to the Advocast, where we explore how advocacy moves adult education and opportunity forward. Today's conversation sits right at the crossroads of adult education and workforce development. How combining these messages can make our advocacy stronger, more unified, and more effective. I'm joined today by Jaimie Francis, Vice President of Policy and Programs at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. In her role, Jaimie develops and oversees the Foundation's programs for workforce development, including the nationally recognized Talent Pipeline Management Initiative, which helps employers and education partners align training with real industry needs. She also manages the National Learning Network, a community of more than 1,600 practitioners and partners across the country who are advancing talent solutions in their states and communities. Jaimie also serves as faculty for that TPM, Talent Pipeline Management Academy, where she trains leaders from chambers of commerce, business associations, and economic development agencies to build education and workforce partnerships that work. Before joining the Chamber Foundation, Jaimie worked in student support and admission roles at the George Washington University and Davidson College, where she earned her bachelor's in sociology. She also holds a master's in higher education administration from George Washington University. Together, we'll explore where adult education and workforce development naturally align, how business and education voices can amplify each other, and what policymakers need to understand about the shared goal of building a strong, skilled, and inclusive talent pipeline. Jaimie, thank you so much for being here. Before we jump into the questions, I think it's important to acknowledge why this conversation matters right now. So across the country, adult education programs and employers are finding themselves facing many of the same challenges. So helping people build new skills, fill high demand jobs, and keep pace with an economy that's ever changing. So when we bring adult education and workforce leaders together, we're not just talking about filling jobs, we're talking about creating pathways to opportunity, stability, and growth for millions of adults. So let's start right there. From your vantage point at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, where do you see the strongest alignment between adult education and workforce development? And then how can that alignment translate into stronger national and local workforce strategies?
Thanks so much, Erin. I'm glad to be with you today, and it's a great question to tee us off. When we think about the fact that we still have millions of open jobs, and you can make all of the references that you'd like in terms of, decreasing number of open jobs. But the fact of the matter is, quite frankly, we still have millions of open jobs and millions of people that are not currently connected to employment. And so we have to be thinking very strategically about how do we include adult workers in the conversation, not just to fill these current open jobs, but as we think, as you said, with a very dynamic labor market and transitioning of skills and core competencies that are needed to be successful in today's jobs, as well as the jobs of the future. We have to be constantly thinking about equipping people with the skills that are going to help them transition into employment or be able to advance in their careers over time. It's just essential for us to be thinking about economic mobility for all people, and that most definitely includes our adult workers. So we want to make sure that they're always a part of the conversation, and too often they're overlooked and not really for any particular good reasons. So that's why we love the many partners that work with the Coalition on Adult Basic Education who have this at the top of mind and are thinking about really effectively partnering with the employer community to figure out how can we make sure that our adult workers are equipped with the skills, but also have the support that they need to be able to show up in the workforce, whether that be childcare, transportation, or other career coaching opportunities. So there's a lot to unpack there, but I think that we have to constantly be strategic about including adult workers in the conversation.
I love that. And I'll say this is something I have struggled with because my background was working with our emergent literacy population. So our learners who are working on those basic alphabetics and things like that. And so for them, their urgency was very community and family focused, and they weren't yet thinking about that workforce pathway. And I find that a lot of our instructors from our field who are in that area sometimes don't quite understand how to communicate that employer and adult education alignment. So, how can employers and education leaders communicate, so the people who might still see these things as two separate systems?
Yeah, I think that it's part of the impetus behind why we're advocates for skills-based hiring and advancement practices is because we need to be thinking about it's not just the fact that people might be learning, basic literacy skills, right? There are many other attributes and skills that those folks do have that could be very productive and effective in the workplace. So how can we help them articulate their life experiences that they've had that could contribute to their productivity or to their performance as a really great worker for a company that is eager for reliable effective talent. And so when we think about the many communities across the country that are leveraging employer-led talent strategies, one of the things that we're constantly pushing for the employer community to adopt is a skills-based hiring approach, is not to rely solely on credentials as proxies of what a person knows or is capable of doing, but how can we really push the employer community to describe, here is an essential skill and here's how it shows up for the roles that we're either having difficulty filling or difficulty retaining people in those positions, so that as those folks go through the learning experiences that you're talking about, they're able to make a clear connection of not only how that contributes to their appeal as a potential employee, but again, thinking about their lived experiences and how that may help them find a great job for them in the workplace.
I I love that focus on skills, because I've worked in areas that have previously been like manufacturing centered communities, and that was what that economy was based on. And in one particular community I'm thinking of, that manufacturing bubble kind of burst.
Mhm.
Manufacturers suddenly left, and what was left behind were so many individuals who had the skills necessary, but many of them didn't have any credentials, including maybe a high school diploma, right? It was, well, finish high school, but if you're not college bound, you could go start working in manufacturing and make a family sustaining wage at that time. And so when that happened, there were so many people with those skills without those credentials, and the need for adult education in that area was so essential, both for
Yeah.
those employers and for those people who wanted that dignity again of being back in that job market.
Yes, and I think we're going to continue to see big shifts in terms of the skills that are necessary to be, successful in roles. And so, how are we helping our adult worker community, but also just more broadly, how are we helping people think about, the path of lifelong learning that we're all on now, and making sure that as those busts or as those big disruptions happen, we're able to have a really agile talent pipeline so that people can shift when needed into adjacent industries, or at least feel empowered with information about themselves so that they can
Yes.
very quickly pivot and find employment elsewhere. It's one of the reasons that we're big believers in learning and employment records, which are meant to help learners and workers be able to articulate and have a wallet, if you will, of all of the records, all of the experiences that they've had. That's a little bit more agile than the standard kind of resume, which we know isn't even applicable in all industries,
Right.
right? So how can we ensure that we're kind of transitioning to this more digital marketplace, but in a way that doesn't leave anybody behind?
Exactly. And it you mentioned that point too of of educating individuals, right? You don't know what you don't know. And that's part of the reason why advocacy is so important, because if we don't talk about the impact or the needs, then we can't expect those policymakers or funders or the public to understand what those needs are. So can you I'm going to pivot there to advocacy and just ask if you could share an example of where combining the business community's voice with adult education advocacy has created greater impact, regardless of who that audience might be.
Yeah, I think we can look to the state of Michigan as a great example in that their state labor and economic opportunity department has really invested in employer-led collaboratives across the state, including some of which very intentionally partner with adult workforce programs. And so more granularly, I think of some colleagues in the Kalamazoo region that have invested efforts into early childcare providers, which, as you likely know, is an industry that often sees a lot of turnover, doesn't always have the highest pay, but at the same time is such a critical part of any region's economy because parents aren't able to go to work if they do not have reliable, high quality childcare for them to turn to when they need to show up for work. And so our colleague at the Kalamazoo Literacy Council brought together about 7 employers that represent the early childcare industry to say, we are going to collaborate with one another to try to solve for this big challenge that we're experiencing in having enough childcare providers. And he was receiving support not only from the state, but had also been able to secure philanthropic dollars to really invest the organization's time, not just in bringing these employers together, but to also say, we're going to be very thoughtful in terms of the wraparound support services that are needed to ensure if we're going to be bringing people into this talent pipeline, that they have the career advancement opportunities that they need, that they get the mentoring and the coaching that they need, that they have childcare for themselves and transportation or any other type of kind of service that they might need to be able to go through a training program, get a more advanced credential in this space, and then become a fantastic childcare provider. And one of the things that I really loved about Kalamazoo's approach is that they went super hyper local. So they wanted workers for the childcare industry that were representative of the community members that they were serving. And so they really took this at a neighborhood approach. And because of people who had been participating in adult literacy programs, that was just a really natural place for them to start to skill those folks up and to get them credentialed so that they could be great childcare providers. And they saw amazing results. All that our colleague at the Kalamazoo Literacy Council asked of the employers was to ensure that they all had a good, starting wage for those workers, which meant that those employers had to increase their hourly rates for those workers by a couple of dollars for quite a few of them. So he didn't require for them to pay anything to the Kalamazoo Literacy Council. It was all about, let's make sure that these people are getting a good wage as a starting place. And then we're able to build a structure so that as they got more credentials, as they got more experience, there was a pathway for advancement for them, which I think is just sends such a strong message to the state that their public sector dollars were put to good use. They were able to be paired with private sector investment in workers, in talent solutions. We're able to get the attention of the philanthropic community to say, hey, this program is working. You're seeing your retention rates jump up to more than 80%. We're seeing people be promoted in this career. So it was just a really wonderful example of all of those things coming together, demonstrating the importance of employer leadership and buy-in to that process to say, this is how many workers we need. These are the skills, the key skills we need for them to be successful in this role. I'm going to help build a pathway for them to be able to advance. Let's all work really cohesively together so that we can, have the rising tide lift all boats for all of the employers to benefit from that investment, but then to be able to demonstrate to the state that those things could be married in a really powerful way. And now there's hopes and plans to have more of a statewide childcare collaborative across the state of Michigan, which I'm really excited about, and hoping that we'll get to see more private and public sector investment in that solution since it's worked so well.
Yeah. Wow, that touches my motherly heart because, you know, it, we want people in those childcare roles who want to be there, right? Like, I know that's not a role for me, but there are so many people where that is their dream, right? And they will put all of their heart and their soul into working with those children. Those are the people we want. So being able to, as you said, look within the community, and you mentioned how there were so many different organizations or individuals who were working together on this. And I think that also really highlights the importance of looking around us at who's available to be a partner, because we don't want to duplicate services. Right? We
Right.
don't want to redo something that somebody's already been doing for years and they do it phenomenally. And maybe they don't do it in exactly this capacity, but it's only because this idea hasn't been there before. So I love that piece of each organization working together, but with that human-centered approach. The goal is to empower that individual who then empowers the community. And I'm going to be paying attention to see what Michigan does, because that is certainly something that could be replicated, right?
Absolutely.
Now,
And we are seeing that in other states as well, but they've looked to Michigan as an example. And similarly, going back to the question that you asked about advocacy, like the most powerful advocacy tool is demonstration of success, right? And being able to articulate, like, here's what worked, here's what was hard, here's where there are policy opportunities for us to come in and identify like ways that we can make what was hard easier, try to eliminate some of those barriers so that we can have dramatically bigger impact, again, in ways that affect our workers, including our adult workers.
what elements of that collaboration were especially persuasive, did you find? Like, what pieces were really like, oh, well, this has gotten the attention of policymakers in the area?
Yeah, so I work for the U.S. Chamber Foundation, so we're the nonprofit affiliate of the U.S. Chamber. So all of our initiatives really speak the language of business, and our goal is to try to develop innovative solutions that really tap into the power of business. And so when local chambers and state chambers from all over across the country come to visit us in DC, and I get to talk a little bit about the programs that we're doing on the nonprofit side, one of the key messages that I always try to hammer home on the front end of the discussion, on the back end of the discussion, is that employer leadership is so critical. At the end of the day, they have the greatest currency in that ecosystem, and that's jobs, right? So they're going to be hiring for those jobs. They're the ones who are putting the job descriptions together. They're the ones that are going to be working to retain those employees. And so we really need to make sure that they are not just contributors to the design of, talent solutions, so a program of study or a learning opportunity, but they're really leading those conversations, not because they're the ones that are going to completely be in charge of executing that program of study, but we want to make sure that if a person enrolls in a program or participates in a short-term degree, that they are going to be able to achieve employment afterwards, or be able to advance in their career afterwards. And so that component of employers' willingness to not only lead the conversation, but to work alongside their peers, or you can think of them as, the competitors from across the street who you're constantly poaching talent from. We love to see that leadership and that collaboration shine through. That's just where we've seen some pretty impressive results, when employers are willing to say, you know what, I'm going to achieve a heck of a lot more if I work with my peers to try to overcome this challenge than if I'm to try to go it alone.
Yeah, absolutely. Being able to, again, like it's that advocacy, but there from the employer side of saying, this is what I need. This is what my issue is, knowing like what that impact could be, if they resolve those issues.
Yeah, they have a very important voice, and policymakers tend to pay attention to what the business community has to say. So imagine the power if you get, in this case, it was a group of 9 early childcare providers coming together. We've seen examples across the country in which you've got 90, financial service companies coming together, or 20 hospitals in a region coming together saying this is a real need that we're having, and we are not able to do business, expand our business, whatever it may be, without this critical talent need solved.
Thank you. And I just for our adult education audience here, just also saying like if these employers are coming together and they're talking to policymakers about a need and how they don't maybe have that capacity to do that internal training on some of these pieces, and you're there as a partner able to say like, this is what we are able to provide currently, or this is what, maybe if policy or funding or something were different, this is the additional piece we would be able to provide. We could help be part of the solution. Here are the challenges that we need to solve as that united front. It makes, again, policymakers are really going to listen to employers.
Yeah, and that's why it's been a really fun experience to see the expansion of employer-led strategies and methodologies to try to better co-design those talent solutions, in partnership between education and training providers, be that adult education programs or otherwise, to make sure that employers are very active participants in that process. Because the worst thing would be, right, if we were to invest so much money, so much time into developing these programs that ultimately did not get employers what they need, which at the end of the day means that learners and workers don't get connected to that employment opportunity. And so we very much try to stop that before it gets too far, because it can be really attractive to go after a grant program or a funding opportunity, because it's something that a non-employer group has said is a need. If you don't have that validation by the employers that it is a demonstrated need, then there's not a guarantee there's going to be jobs for people who participate in that program on the back end. So how can we get ahead of that? Our belief is that that's why employer leadership is such a critical element.
That's really, thank you for sharing that. That's really illuminating, and I hadn't really thought about it in that perspective. And also I'm not aware of all of the incredible work that's happening on that workforce side, because it is so robust and so deep. I feel like I'm getting surface layer information, and that I'm going to reflect on that. That is very interesting. Now, let's talk about messaging here for a minute. So what's one key message that you wish more policymakers understood, specifically about how adult education and workforce development work together to strengthen the talent pipeline and that economic mobility?
Yeah, I mean, I think like at the most basic level, right? Like we just have to think about it as a math game. We are trying to think about, where do we sit in terms of our growing talent, our young people who are in the education pipeline now. We know that demographics in terms of age is going down. So how are we thinking about the long-term strategy? That has to include adult workers. The math just doesn't work without it. So it's not a CSR play, a corporate social responsibility play. This makes sense. We truly need everybody off the bench in order to meet our workforce needs. So whenever we can put that like business case lens on it, that can be a really powerful and effective message. But we also just don't want to downplay the many, again, like lived experiences that adult workers have had that can greatly contribute to the workforce. And so just never discounting or not thinking about adult workers as a critical solution to solving for some of these really big workforce challenges. They just have to be a part of the equation. It makes business sense. It makes the math work. When we can get all of those folks connected to employment opportunities, and so just never to lose sight of the fact that like we truly do need adult workers as a part of the solution. And so the investment in adult education workforce programs that are working really well, like that is just should be a given.
I'll say again, I kind of spoke to my background in that like emerging literacy side, and I'll say I initially felt like there was a tension between, as you call it, the math game, right? Like the numbers of like why individuals are needed within the workforce, like why we need to do this, but then also that human, the human side of it. And what I've come to learn is that that tension doesn't really exist. It doesn't, right? Like there is a way to solve these needs within the workforce and do so, as you said, in a like a skills-based approach, this human-centered approach where we don't discount the experiences and the person that we're working with. And so I just wanted to put that out there in case anybody else in our audience, is kind of feeling like, oh, there's this tension between numbers and stories, and it, that doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I love y'all's Behind Every Employer initiative, in which you're able to share those stories. And I said this on stage recently at a recent event, that we can both do well and do good. And I won't take credit for that line because one of my Chamber Foundation colleagues, Mark DeCourcy, says it often. But it does not have to be an and, or an either this or an either that. It does not have to be that way. We certainly can do both. It depends, to your question about messaging, it depends on your audience, which one lands the best way. But you don't have to choose. We actually can do both.
Ah, I love that. Now, in an ideal world, if every policymaker could take one concrete action to better support that adult education workforce development connection, what would that ideal concrete action be?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, as I said before, I think that looking to programs that are working to influence policy just makes all of the sense in the world, right? And COABE has so many different examples where those partnerships are really working. I mean, you guys do a great job of demonstrating ROI and showcasing just how many people have benefited from participating in an adult education and workforce development program. So how can we look to what's working, right? We're always looking to understand performance and measurement and where those things are working. Why wouldn't we invest more to expand those programs, to build out capacity for those programs, to ensure that we're not throwing up any barriers that might prohibit partnership between employers and adult education programs. So the more that we can look to, okay, what is working? Let's make sure that we are not stepping away from those investments because it's not like the hot thing to do right now. It's no, let's go to what works, and where we can learn from it, build on it, and really try to benefit more learners and workers that are being able to connect to employment or to career advancement opportunities as a result of participating in those programs.
I just, sorry, I feel so full now. This conversation has been so enlightening, and just so that it just makes me feel so hopeful, like hearing from the employer perspective and the like how all of us can work together doing what we do best to really help make our communities, our states, our nation stronger, right? And to help get the individuals who are ready to get to work or ready to reskill, to upskill, that we have systems in place. And yeah, we can always tweak and improve. We should always be continuously searching for continuous improvement, but they're investing in the things that work. And
100%.
yeah. and adult education works, right? Those partnerships with employers work. So I'll just open it up in case you have any last thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience.
Yeah, I mean, two of the key messages, as I said, that I like to hammer home is just that criticality of employer leadership and making sure to engage them on the front end of program design as opposed to the back end when it's time to start trying to connect people to employment, and just for both sides to be active listeners to one another, because we know that there are things that employers don't understand about the adult education community that may be different, or things that they need to take into consideration as they build out those partnerships with an adult education program that may be different from other types of programs that they recruit as talent sources. So just helping, have an open mind to educating them about what that looks like and what that can mean in terms of, successful onboarding for adult talent. And then on the flip side of that, just being really open-minded to hearing what employers have to say about the critical skills that are necessary for those jobs. And again, making sure that that's included on the front end of any program designed as opposed to on the back end. So we all have learning to do to experience with one another, and those partners that are willing to come to the table and to agree to what success looks like, and what are some common goals, what are some indicators that we're on the right track. That's where we see really successful partnerships happen. And so we're excited to see more of them and do whatever we can to try to support brokering those relationships and partnerships between the adult education community and the employer community.
Jaimie, thank you so much for sharing your insights and for helping us to see how powerful it can be when education and employers are, as you said, working together from the start, but then also speaking with one voice to the impact of that partnership. Thank you so much for joining today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you all. And if we can be of support, please always feel free to reach out to us at workforce@uschamber.com.
For those listening, if today's conversation sparked ideas about how your program can partner with employers or align with workforce initiatives, visit behindeveryemployer.org to explore resources, success stories, and tools that can help you get started. You can also check out the links in our show notes for more from Jaimie and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, including the talentsupplychain.org, where you'll find an overview of the talent pipeline management strategy, tpmacademy.org, which is the TPM Opportunity Populations Resource Guide, which offers strategies for connecting employers and adult education programs. And last but not least, you'll also find a case study on that Kalamazoo, Michigan employer-led partnership at the forwardontalent.org/stories link that you see. The future of adult education is deeply connected to the future of work. And when we align our messages, we amplify our impact. I'm Erin Vobornik, and this has been the Advocast. Thank you for tuning in, and continue to educate and advocate.